Today's stories are taken from r/Letsnotmeet, a creepy high school stalker posted by u/ULALALA. I typically don't like attention. Yet since freshman year, I've gotten nothing but admirers. It wasn't quite the dream though. I tend to attract guys that I find, for lack of a better word, gross and dumb. They have no idea about boundaries, nor hygiene. People who I did like never seem to feel the same. This one boy stands out like a sore thumb because I once told this story on a YouTube video. I was however urged to delete it because of some of the information I said. So hopefully this won't follow suit. This started when I was around 14 to early 15 years old. For some quick context, I am autistic and use a classroom called BMC. This classroom was made for kids who needed help with emotional issues such as anger or depression. I only ever went to this classroom when I needed a break away from the kids in the hectic classrooms or when I was agitated. I never really talked to anyone in the classroom other than the staff. There were always at least 2 or 3 teachers in there to make sure none of these kids went too crazy. Some were chill, but a lot of them were crazy and hyper. I, most of the time, listened to music while working. Because of this, I was shut off from the craziness and just was in my own world. One day, one of these kids who we will call Jack, came out to my spot on the bus stop. I ride the special need bus because regular ones are typically too crazy and are crowded. But the bus I rode parked at the farthest end of the bus loop. So I normally wait by the trees nearby while listening to music and sing. When Jack came up to me, I was kinda surprised. He said that he had a crush on me, despite us never talking prior to this point. That was one warning sign I ignored. The second was that he asked if I wanted to go with him to prom. He was a senior. What made it even worse was that when my bus finally showed up, I gave him my number and told him bye. What he said back made me want to vomit. He said with no hesitations, "I love you." The literal minute I sit down on the bus, he starts spamming me with texts. At one point, I muted his texts and they'd still blow up my phone. Eventually, I told my parents and BMC manager what he was doing. They told me he was 18 and that what he was doing could be considered illegal. I immediately blocked him on every platform I owned. I thought that would be the end of it, but sadly not. He would occasionally try and talk to me again. At first, I tried to be nice about rejecting him, but by the 3rd or 4th time, I grew sick of it. I told him that if he kept it up, I would tell my parents and they would call the police. He left me alone for a long time after that. But this whole experience taught me to trust my gut because he was literally trying to date a 14-year-old girl. I hope this tells you all that no matter what, it is okay to listen to your gut. Otherwise you could end up in a very scary or uncomfortable scenario. Followed by a creep in the metro. Posted by u/ChaseMeAtoy. This happened when I was 19. I went to get drinks with my female friend after classes, and we ended up staying at a bar close to our university until around 10 p.m., getting pretty drunk. I live in Moscow, and the university where I study is located pretty far away from my house. It takes me 1.5 hours by public transport to reach it. The friend I was with lived in a dormitory which was much closer, just a 30-minute metro ride away from uni, so we decided I would stay with her until her station and then switch lines to go up north where I live. By that time there weren't that many people inside the train car, just a few passengers here and there, and a couple of older men sitting directly in front of us. We were both visibly drunk. It was a fun evening, so we joked around and laughed a lot. Then my friend got off, I said goodbye to her and, since alcohol usually makes me sleepy, dozed off immediately after she left. The whole time one of the men seated in front of us would silently glance at us from time to time. I assumed he was judging us because we were obviously drunk, but ultimately paid it no mind. I ended up accidentally missing the station where I needed to switch lines, which meant I had to take the train in the opposite direction. As I got up and walked to the door of the train car, there was nothing suspicious, but then I noticed the older, looked like he was in his 50s, man who was staring at me during the whole train ride also get out of the train a couple of seconds after me. Again, I wasn't particularly alarmed at that moment. I tend to keep track of my immediate surroundings / male strangers around me after some unfortunate incidents in my teenage years, but I also try not to jump to conclusions too quickly out of fear that it's just me being paranoid. The weird part started when this same dude not only followed me out of the train car, but also got on the train going in the opposite direction. He wasn't following me closely, he would stay several meters away and act like he wasn't looking at me, but as soon as I stepped foot on that train, he rushed to the next train car, and once there, slowly moved to stand next to the window from where he could see my car. I probably wouldn't even notice him if I didn't see him looking at me earlier and decided to keep an eye on him. By then I was properly alarmed. If he simply got off at the same station as me by coincidence, why would he need to go back in the same direction, and why would he linger back and make sure I got on the train before entering it himself? I was also nearly sober and extremely anxious by that time. Still, though, I wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt, so I ended up skipping the transfer station I actually needed on purpose and getting off at the one right after that. Again, he exited at the same station and lingered back. I transferred lines. This new station was a transfer too, just to another line. If you look at the map of the Moscow Metro, you'll know that there are quite a lot of them next to each other in the city center, and sure enough, he followed me to the station at the new line. Now I was wondering what to do. I considered looking for Metro employees and informing them of this issue, but couldn't see any. They are sometimes present at stations, but that was not the case at that time. I knew I could probably find an employee overlooking the escalators, but I didn't want to bother them, and you're actually not supposed to talk to them, lol. I also considered walking up to some random strangers and asking them for help or pressing the SOS button on the machines installed inside each metro station if the situation got worse, but couldn't muster up the courage to do it yet. It was weird. I had a creep following me, and by that point I was painfully aware that he was doing it on purpose, yet the situation didn't seem dire enough to involve outside help. Still, it was almost 11 p.m., the metro stations kept getting emptier, and I needed to get home somehow, so I felt myself slowly starting to panic. I didn't feel comfortable staying at one station with him following me for a long time, so I got onto the train again. The intervals are 2 to 5 minutes, and sure enough, he got into the next train car and came up to the window again. I got off at the next station, and he exited after me again. By that time I was sober, increasingly angry and looking for any Metro employees, but still there weren't any. I decided to try and shake him by hiding behind the columns until the next train came and getting inside at the last possible moment, and just as I stepped behind a column, I saw him walk to the center of station. Before that he would linger next to the columns by the other side of the platform, and look around. What I did next might not have been the smartest move, but I was suddenly very angry at the whole situation. People were still present at the station, and it was clear that the guy was trying not to get noticed. So I purposefully walked right up to him and looked him dead in the eye with all the hatred I felt at the moment. He looked taken aback at first, and then tried to act like he was just some random passerby, turned around, walked a bit away from me, and stood there awkwardly while I kept staring right at him. It went on like that until the train arrived, and just like I planned, I got on at the very last second to make sure he wouldn't run after me, and that was, thankfully, the end of it. I was shaking the whole train ride home and switched lines and stations like 3 more times to make sure he wasn't still following me, but thankfully he seemed to give up. My friend Ronan, posted by u/BigGloiner. When I was about 9 years old, 6 years ago, I would go to the local park with my friends to hang out and mess around. You know, typical things a 9-year-old would do. One day when we were at the park we met a kid our age called Ronan. Ronan had dirty blonde hair, slightly darker skin than the rest of us, and claimed he was Russian. We believed him because his mother would speak to him in Russian. At first we didn't believe him. My friends and I became quick friends with Ronan because he was a pretty sound guy and we shared a lot of the same hobbies such as climbing trees, soccer, etc. This went on for a couple of weeks and it was all good. Then, things got weird. Ronan would begin to brag about how he knew how to use weapons and how he could beat anyone who was older than him up. We all thought he was just trying to impress us, but as our friendship progressed he started to say more graphic things to us, like how back in Russia his dad owned a shotgun and would take care of anyone who had wronged him with it. When Ronan said take care we didn't know what it meant, but I now know it meant killing a person with a shotgun. When Ronan said take care we didn't know what it meant, but I now know it meant killing a person with a shotgun. One such story was how back when he was living in Russia, some teenage bullies from his school found him alone in a park and proceeded to peel all of his skin off by hand. He then said that when a teacher found him he was nothing but a bloody mess. Ronan then explained how when he got out of the hospital he had bandages all over his body and looked like a mummy. He said this part with a smile on his face. The story ends with Ronan's dad tracking down the teenagers who skinned him and executing them with his shotgun. My friends and I called BS on it, but at the same time we were disturbed that he could come up with such a gruesome and violent story at the tender age of 9. Eventually, my friends began telling their parents about the stories, and needless to say the parents would now accompany us to the park. The last time I hung out with Ronan was when I was 11 years old. My friends and I were hanging out at the park, just hanging around, when Ronan walked up to us. Ronan told us that he had something to show us and to follow him into the wooded area of the park. Now, being 11-year-olds, we were supposed to be more mature than when we were 9. Right? Unfortunately that's not the answer, and we followed him into the wooded section of the park. Ronan led us to a lone tree stump in the center of the woods and gestured for us come to him. Ronan was looking at something behind the stump so well looked as well, and what we saw disgusted us. Ronan was showing us a dead fox that looked like it had been like that for days. Its fur was falling off and we could see its rotting flesh. My friend shouted "What the fuck?" at Ronan and asked why he was showing us that. Ronan simply replied with "Because it's cool to look at." This is when we figured out Ronan wasn't all there in the head and we promptly walked out of the woods, leaving Ronan behind. From that day forward we began to see Ronan less and less. We would see him walking alone by himself but not go over to him, and by the time we were 12, he had stopped coming to the park. When we all finally went into secondary school, we had forgotten Ronan and were focused on our school life instead. One day during the Easter holidays, me and my friends decided to meet up at a local park which we hadn't been to since primary school. It was there where we finally learned what happened to Ronan. We encountered a student that was from the local public school. My friends and I are in a private school 20 minutes away from our homes. We had a chat with the student and I brought up Ronan. The instant I brought Ronan into the conversation, the student's face turned very solemn. I asked what happened to Ronan and the student told me that Ronan had to move to a different neighborhood because he had been kicked out of the local school for savagely beating up a classmate. When I asked why he had beaten up his classmate, the student said it was because Ronan's classmate had pissed him off by constantly calling BS on Ronan's gory stories. I still wonder sometimes how Ronan is managing out there and I hope he gets the help he needs, but until then, Ronan, let's not meet again.
Thanks for watching. Please do like, share, comment and subscribe for more videos.